Imagine having $7 million in your bank account, but the one person you want to tell has blocked your number. After years of asking your daughter for money, the tables have turned in the most tragic way possible, and she'll never know until it's too late. I'm Everett, 68 years old and dying. The cancer will take me tonight, but that's not what breaks my heart. What hurts most is sitting here, staring at my phone screen with trembling fingers, seeing those 5 devastating words. This number has been blocked. All I wanted was to hear my daughter's voice one last time, to tell her that I finally had something to give instead of take, that for once I wasn't calling to ask for money. But some goodbyes never get said. Some gifts arrive when no one's left to thank. Follow my journey from a desperate father to an unexpected millionaire making his final sacrifice. Follow the channel, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because this story might just change how you think about the calls you choose not to answer. My name is Everett. I'm 68 years old, and if you're hearing my voice right now, it's because my daughter never answered that call. In fact, she blocked me. She thought it was just another request for money, but it wasn't. It was my goodbye. It was the last thing I would do for her before I disappeared from this world. I was sitting on the porch of the shelter, my old phone in hand, the screen trembling along with my fingers. The money had already been transferred, $7 million, all in her name. She didn't know, and I just wanted to hear her voice one last time, to tell her I was never perfect, but I was always hers. But before I could say anything, the call dropped. Blocked. I saw the cold message on the screen like watching my own tombstone being carved. I smiled, and I cried too, because what she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that cancer would take me that night, and I chose to die in peace, the way I'd always lived, in the quietest way possible. You know, it wasn't always like this between us. There was a time when Darla would run to me with her arms wide open, like her whole world fit in my lap. But life has a cruel way of tearing things apart, doesn't it? Especially the beautiful things. The doctor had given me the news 3 months ago. Terminal, he said, like he was talking about a bus station. 6 months at most. I didn't tell anyone. What was the point? My daughter hadn't spoken to me in years, not really. Just cold, obligatory responses when I called asking for help. For money. For anything to keep me afloat in this merciless world that had taken everything from me. My wife, my health, my dignity. I still remember the last real conversation we had 2 years ago. Her voice cut through the phone like a blade. Dad, you only call when you need something. That's not love, I don't even know what to call it anymore. She was right. And that's why, when Jacob left me everything, I knew exactly what I had to do. Jacob, the old farmer who saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed. We met at the rural recovery farm where I volunteered after I lost my apartment in Boston. He didn't have much use for words, but he had plenty of use for an extra pair of hands around his property. He'd call me brother sometimes when the evening light hit just right and we'd sit on his porch swing, watching the sun disappear behind the cornfields. A man's worth isn't in what he owns, he told me once, but in what he gives away. I never thought he was talking about himself. Never imagined he'd leave it all to me. The farm, the land, the stocks he'd quietly accumulated over 60 years of saving every penny. And I certainly never thought I'd be worth $7 million on the day I planned to die. The bank manager looked at me like I was a ghost when I walked in to set up the transfer. A disheveled old man in second-hand clothes arranging for millions to be moved to someone else's name. I didn't explain. Didn't need to. The papers were all in order, thanks to Jacob's attorney. Are you sure about this, Mr. Wilson? The manager asked, her perfectly manicured fingernails hovering over the keyboard. I nodded. More sure than I've been about anything in my life. After it was done, I sat in the park across from the bank for a long time, watching people rush by. Young mothers pushing strollers, businessmen with their eyes glued to phones, teenagers laughing too loudly, all of them completely unaware that an invisible man was sitting there, having just given away a fortune. That's when I decided to try one last time, to hear her voice, to say goodbye without really saying it. Because how do you tell your child you're dying when you've already been dead to them for years? I dialed her number with shaking hands. 1 ring, 2 rings. I rehearsed what I would say. Darla, it's Dad. I'm not calling for anything. I just wanted to tell you that That's when I saw it. This number has been blocked by the recipient. I stared at those words until they blurred. until the phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the wooden porch, until the tears came, silent and heavy, like rain on a grave. It's funny how your life can be worth millions one minute and nothing the next. How you can go from having everything to losing it all in the span of a heartbeat, or in my case, in the span of a blocked call. So I picked up my phone one last time and recorded a message she might never see. Then I wrote a letter she might never read. And I walked back to my room at the shelter where I'd arranged everything neatly. My medication, the glass of water, the picture of Darla from her high school graduation. The last time I remember her looking at me with something other than disappointment. Tonight, I'll take my final dose, not to end things early, but to ease the pain the doctors warned would come. And tomorrow when they find me, I'll be just another statistic, another unclaimed body, another forgotten soul. But somewhere out there, my daughter will go on living, and one day she'll discover what I've done, what I've left her. Not because I want her gratitude or her grief or her guilt, but because in the end a father's love is the only thing I had left to give. And love, unlike money, should never be held back, even when it's too late, even when the call gets blocked. My daughter Darla used to look at me like I hung the moon. I can still remember her tiny fingers wrapped around mine as we walked through Central Park on Sunday afternoons, her pink sneakers barely keeping up with my stride. "Slow down, Daddy," she'd giggle, and I would, because in those days I would have done anything to make her happy. We'd stop for ice cream at that little vendor near the duck pond. Chocolate for her, vanilla for me, and she'd end up with more on her face than in her stomach. Her mother would click her tongue and wipe Darla's cheeks with practiced patience, and we'd all laugh like we had all the time in the world. But we didn't. Sarah, my wife, Darla's mother, got sick when Darla was just 14. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that doesn't give you time to prepare, to say proper goodbyes, to make peace with the universe that suddenly turned hostile. 8 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. That's all we got. I remember standing at the cemetery holding Darla's hand so tight I was afraid I might break it. She didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of everyone. That night, though, I heard her sobbing through the wall that separated our rooms, and I sat outside her door, paralyzed. What could I possibly say that would make this better? What words could fill the void her mother had left? The truth is, I never found those words. And in their absence, a distance grew between us. Silent at first, just a small crack in the foundation of our relationship. But cracks have a way of spreading, don't they? I lost my job at the accounting firm 6 months after the funeral. Budget cuts, they said. Nothing personal, but it felt personal when I couldn't find another position, when my age became a liability instead of an asset. 54 years old with a mortgage and a teenager who needed college tuition, and suddenly I was overqualified for every job I applied for. I tried to hide our financial troubles from Darla. She had enough to deal with, finishing high school without her mother, applying to colleges, trying to piece together some semblance of a normal teenage life. But kids know. They always know. The day I had to tell her we couldn't afford Cornell, her dream school, the one with the veterinary program she'd set her heart on, was the day I saw something shift in her eyes. The admiration that had always been there, even after her mother died, began to fade, replaced by something harder. Disappointment, maybe. Or worse, pity. "It's okay, Dad," she said, but it wasn't. We both knew it. She ended up at State on a partial scholarship, working 2 jobs to cover the rest. I found work where I could, night security at office buildings, seasonal tax preparation, even lawn care in the summers. Anything to send her a little money each month to ease her burden. But it was never enough. The calls between us grew shorter, the visits home less frequent. When she graduated and got her first real job at a vet clinic in Phoenix, I was so proud I could hardly speak. She'd done it, despite everything, despite me. I flew out for her graduation using money I couldn't spare, sat in the audience and watched her accept her diploma with tears streaming down my face. "You did it, baby girl," I whispered as I hugged her afterward, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, something floral and unfamiliar. She stiffened slightly in my embrace. "I did," she said. "Not we. Not us against the world anymore. Just her, on her own." The years that followed blurred together. My health started failing. Nothing dramatic, just the slow deterioration that comes with age and poverty. Arthritis in my hands made it harder to work. The basement apartment I'd moved to after selling the house flooded one winter, destroying most of what I'd kept from our old life. Photos, letters, Sarah's recipe box. All gone. And then came the calls. The ones I'm not proud of. The first time I asked Darla for money was after I'd exhausted every other option. A hospital bill I couldn't pay. The threat of collections. Just a loan, I told myself. I'd pay her back. But I couldn't. And one call became 2, became 5, became a pattern I couldn't break. Each time, her voice grew a little colder, a little more distant. "Dad, you can't keep doing this," she said during our last real conversation. "I have my own bills, my own life. You need to figure this out." "I know, sweetheart. I'm trying. I just need a little help until what? Until next month when something else comes up? This isn't sustainable." The silence that followed felt like a chasm opening between us. "You only call when you want something," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not love, Dad. It's parasitism." The word cut through me like a blade. Was that what I'd become to my own daughter? A parasite? The thought was unbearable. "I'm sorry," I said, but the line had already gone dead. After that, I made a promise to myself. No more calls for money. No more being a burden. I'd find another way. Even if it meant sleeping on park benches or eating at soup kitchens. I'd rather disappear than continue being the father who only reached out when he needed something. And that's how I ended up at the rural recovery farm, a place for old men like me and ex-cons trying to rebuild their lives. A place where Jacob found me, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled, calling me brother in that deep Arkansas drawl of his. Little did I know that meeting him would change everything. That his friendship would give me the one thing I thought I'd lost forever, a chance to be the father Darla deserved, even if she never knew it. Even if she had already blocked my number, considering me nothing more than a ghost from her past, a voice she never wanted to hear again. Jacob Riley wasn't what you'd call a talkative man. When I first met him at the recovery farm, I mistook his silence for coldness. He was tall and weathered, with hands like cracked leather and eyes the color of faded denim. The kind of man who looked like he'd seen too much of the world to be impressed by anything anymore. I was assigned to his section of the farm, the chicken coops in the eastern vegetable garden. My first day, he just nodded at me and pointed to a rusty wheelbarrow full of feed. "Chickens need breakfast," he said. That was it. No introduction, no small talk. For 3 weeks, we worked side by side in near total silence. I'd catch him watching me sometimes. His eyes narrowed like he was trying to solve a puzzle. I figured he was just making sure I wasn't stealing eggs or slacking off. God knows I wasn't much use with my arthritic hands and city-soft muscles. Every night I'd collapse into my bunk at the dormitory, aching in places I didn't know could ache. Then came that rainy Tuesday in April. The sky opened up without warning, drenching us both as we repaired a section of fence. I remember the mud sucking at my boots, the rain plastering my thin white hair to my skull, and the cold, dear God, the cold that seemed to reach right into my bones. "Enough," Jacob said suddenly, grabbing my arm. "Inside." He led me to his private cabin, a privilege of being one of the few permanent residents and caretakers of the farm. It was sparse but warm, with a wood stove puffing away in the corner and shelves lined with books that surprised me. Dostoevsky, Steinbeck, Thoreau. Jacob handed me a towel and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid that burned all the way down. We sat in wooden chairs facing the stove, steam rising from our clothes, and that's when he finally spoke more than 3 words to me. "Lost someone, didn't you?" he asked, eyes fixed on the flames. The question caught me off guard. "My wife," I admitted. 13 years ago." He nodded slowly. "Thought so. Got that look about you, like you're carrying a ghost." I remember staring down at my glass, watching the whiskey catch the firelight. 2 ghosts, actually. My wife, and my daughter who's still alive but wants nothing to do with me. "Tell me," he said simply. And I did. I told him everything. About Sarah's death, about my failures as a father, about the calls for money that finally drove Darla away. The words poured out of me like I'd been saving them up for years. Maybe I had. When I finished, Jacob was quiet for so long I thought he might have fallen asleep with his eyes open. Then he said, "My Catherine left me for another man back in '82. Took everything but this land and my dignity. No kids, thank the Lord, but plenty of family who thought I was a fool for staying out here alone." He got up and added another log to the fire. "People think being alone is the worst thing that can happen to a person. It ain't. Worst thing is being surrounded by folks who make you feel alone. From that day on, something changed between us. Not friendship exactly, at least not the kind I'd known before. It was deeper, more elemental. We still didn't talk much, but when we did, the words carried weight. Over the months that followed, I learned his story in pieces. How he'd come from nothing, sharecropper's son in Arkansas. How he'd built his farm acre by acre, dollar by dollar, over 60 years of brutal work. How his wife had left him for a banker from Little Rock who promised her silk dresses and vacations in Europe. Never remarried? I asked him once as we mended chicken wire. Nope, he said, snipping the metal with ancient pliers. Came close once. School teacher from town, but I couldn't do it. Felt like betrayal, though damned if I know who I was betraying. I understood that feeling too well. It was on a cool October evening, sitting on his porch as the sun set over the cornfields, that Jacob called me brother for the first time. We were drinking coffee laced with something stronger, watching the harvest moon rise fat and orange over the horizon. You know, brother, he said, the word falling naturally from his lips. It ain't right what happens to men like us. What's that? I asked. We give and give till there's nothing left, then die alone with empty hands. He looked at me with a fierceness I hadn't seen before. It ain't right. I didn't know what to say to that. It was just the way things were. As winter approached, Jacob's health began to fail. Nothing dramatic, just a cough that wouldn't go away, a slight stoop to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He brushed off my concerns, refused to see a doctor. Man should die the same way he lived, he told me one evening, on his own terms. 3 days later, I found him sitting motionless in his rocking chair, a peaceful expression on his face. The farm supervisor said it was his heart. Went in his sleep. Best way to go. They gave me a day off to attend the funeral. There were maybe 15 people there, mostly farm staff and a few locals. No family. The preacher didn't know him well enough to say anything meaningful, so he stuck to Bible verses and generalities. Afterward, a man in a gray suit approached me. Mr. Wilson? I'm Richard Tanner, Mr. Riley's attorney. He handed me a business card. If you could come by my office tomorrow morning, there are some matters to discuss. I assumed Jacob had left some small debt I needed to settle, or perhaps a keepsake he wanted me to have. I never imagined what was waiting for me in that wood-paneled office in town. Mr. Riley amended his will 3 weeks ago, Tanner said, sliding a document across his desk. He left everything to you. The farm, the land rights, his investments, everything. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. There must be some mistake, I finally managed. We worked together. Tanner shook his head. No mistake, he was quite clear. He handed me a sealed envelope. He also left this for you. Said it would explain. That night, alone in my dormitory room, I opened Jacob's letter with trembling hands. The paper was cheap-lined notebook paper, his handwriting large and blocky. Everett, it read. You're probably wondering why. Simple answer is, because you deserve it. Complex answer is, because you're the only one who'd know what to do with it. Not just the land and money, but the chance to make things right. You've suffered enough in this world, brother. It's not fair to die with empty hands after giving everything you had to people who didn't want it. Now you decide what to do. But remember, regret is a poison. Don't drink it. Your friend, Jacob. At the bottom, there was a postscript. Farm's worth about $7 million with the mineral rights and the stocks. Lawyer knows what to do. I sat on my bunk, the letter clutched in my hand, and wept for the first time since Sarah died. $7 million. The number felt foreign in my mouth, like a word from a language I'd never spoken. I'd spent so many years counting pennies, rationing my heart medication, eating canned soup for dinner 3 nights a week to save money. And now, with a single sheet of paper, I was rich. The irony wasn't lost on me. Wealth had finally found me when I had the least time left to enjoy it. The attorney, Mr. Tanner, was efficient and discreet. He had the look of a man who'd seen fortunes change hands many times before, neither impressed nor surprised by the sudden elevation of a disheveled old farm worker to millionaire. Mr. Riley's affairs are remarkably well organized, he explained, sliding documents across his polished mahogany desk for my signature. The farm has been in his family for generations, but the mineral rights are what make it valuable. Natural gas. He refused to sell while he was alive, said the land deserved more respect than to be hollowed out, but he had no such stipulations for after his death. I remember staring at Tanner's hands as he spoke, clean, manicured, with a heavy gold signet ring, so different from Jacob's hands. From my hands. What are my options? I asked, my voice sounding small in the wood-paneled office. You could keep the farm running, though I wouldn't recommend it without experience. You could sell everything. I already have interested buyers. Or you could sell the mineral rights but keep the property. It's entirely up to you, Mr. Wilson. Up to me. When was the last time anything substantial had been up to me? I'd been at the mercy of employers, landlords, bill collectors, and my own failing body for so long that the concept of choice felt almost threatening. But I knew what I wanted to do. Had known since I read Jacob's letter. I want to sell, I said firmly. Everything as quickly as possible. If Tanner was surprised by my decisiveness, he didn't show it. Very well. I'll begin the process immediately. There's one more thing. Mr. Riley specified that the proceeds could be transferred to a beneficiary of your choosing if you prefer not to manage the funds yourself. My heart skipped a beat. You mean I could put it all in someone else's name? Legally? Yes. As a gift. There would be tax implications, of course, but… My daughter, I interrupted. I want everything to go to my daughter. Tanner nodded, making a note. I'll need her full legal name and contact information. And you'll need to sign a power of attorney allowing us to create accounts in her name. I wrote Darla's information on a notepad with shaking hands. Her address in Phoenix. The phone number she'd never changed, though she'd blocked mine. Her email that probably filtered my messages straight to spam. How long will this take? I asked, suddenly aware of the pressure in my chest, the familiar tightness that had been growing worse in recent weeks. The sale could be completed within a month, perhaps sooner given the interested parties. The transfer of funds, another week or two. A month, maybe 6 weeks total. I didn't know if I had that long. The pain had been getting worse, spreading from my chest to my left arm in the middle of the night. I hadn't told anyone. What was the point? I had no health insurance, no money for treatments. But now, time had become precious in a new way. I need it done faster, I said. Please. Something in my voice must have conveyed my urgency, because Tanner's professional mask slipped for just a moment. He studied my face, then nodded. I'll see what I can do, Mr. Wilson. True to his word, Tanner worked miracles. The sale was completed in 17 days. A record, he told me. The mineral rights went to an energy company, the land and buildings to a wealthy family from Chicago looking for a gentleman's farm, as they called it. I signed the papers in Tanner's office, my signature growing weaker with each document. Then came the day I'd been both longing for and dreading. I sat in Tanner's office as he connected a call to the banking officer handling the transfer. Everything's in order, Tanner said, his voice sounding distant through the ringing in my ears. $7,122,000 to be transferred to the account of Darla Wilson Miller. The banking officer asked for verbal confirmation. Yes, I said, gripping the armrests of my chair. Transfer everything to my daughter. 20 minutes later, it was done. The banking officer sent confirmation to Tanner's computer, a simple email with account numbers and balance information. 7 figures just sitting there, waiting for Darla to discover them. The bank will reach out to her directly, Tanner explained. They'll verify her identity and provide access instructions. It typically takes 24-48 hours for them to make contact. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. After so many years of failing her, of having nothing to give but need and disappointment, I was finally able to provide for my daughter. Not that it erased my failures. Nothing could do that. But maybe, just maybe, it could give her the security I'd never been able to offer. As I stepped out of Tanner's office into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt lighter somehow. Empty, but in a peaceful way. I'd given away my unexpected fortune without a second thought, without keeping a penny for myself. Jacob would have understood. He'd given me the farm knowing full well what I would do with it. I made my way back to the recovery farm one last time, to the small room I'd been occupying since Jacob's death. My few possessions were packed in a duffel bag: clothes, toiletries, the dog-eared photo of Darla at her college graduation, and my old flip phone, the one she'd blocked years ago. I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone heavy in my hand. The screen was cracked, the battery holding less charge every day, not unlike my own failing body, but it still worked. And I still had her number memorized. embedded in my muscle memory from all those desperate calls I'd made in the past. With trembling fingers, I dialed. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. "Darla," I whispered, rehearsing what I would say when she answered. "It's Dad. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just wanted to tell you that I love you, that I've always loved you even when I was at my worst, and I'm sorry." The ringing stopped abruptly. For a split second, my heart soared. She'd answered. But then came the automated message, cold and impersonal. "This number has been blocked by the recipient." I closed my eyes, the phone still pressed to my ear. She hadn't unblocked me. Of course she hadn't. Why would she? As far as she knew, I was still the same burden I'd always been. The message ended. The call disconnected. And in that moment, staring at the blank screen of my ancient phone, I made peace with it. She had every right to keep me blocked, to protect herself from what I'd become in her life. But she would get the money. She would be taken care of. And maybe someday she'd wonder why. Maybe she'd even forgive me. But I wouldn't be around to find out. The morning after the money was transferred, I woke before dawn. The pain in my chest had become a constant companion, a dull pressure that occasionally flared into something sharper, more urgent. I knew what it meant. My father had died of a heart attack at 65, his father at 62. Some legacies you can't escape, no matter how far you run. I packed my few belongings methodically, folding each item with care. The worn flannel shirt Jacob had given me when mine got torn on a fence post. The small leather journal I'd been keeping since Sarah died. 3 pairs of socks, all with holes. A toothbrush. Darla's graduation photo, now creased from years of being carried in my pocket. And finally, the letter I'd written to her the night before, sealed in an envelope with her name. The recovery farm was quiet at 5 a.m., most of the residents still asleep. The early October air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. I stood on the porch of the dormitory for a long moment, breathing it in, committing it to memory. This place had been my sanctuary when I had nowhere else to go. It seemed fitting that it would be the last place I called home. I'd left a note for the program coordinator. Simple, straightforward. "Thank you for everything. Please dispose of any remaining items. Everett Wilson." Nothing about where I was going or why. No forwarding address. No goodbye. Just an end. With my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, I walked down the gravel driveway toward the main road. Each step felt like a statement. I was choosing my exit. For once, I wasn't being evicted by circumstance or necessity. I was walking away on my own terms. The bus station in town was deserted except for a sleepy attendant behind the counter and an elderly woman clutching a plastic bag on one of the molded plastic seats. I bought a one-way ticket to the furthest destination available, a small town near the state border, 3 hours away. It didn't matter where, really. I just needed to disappear. As I waited for the bus, I slipped into the grimy station bathroom and studied my reflection in the spotted mirror. The face looking back at me was a stranger's. Hollow cheeks, gray stubble, eyes that had seen too much disappointment. I ran a trembling hand through my thinning hair and practiced a smile. It looked more like a grimace. "You did good, Everett," I told my reflection. One thing right, at the end. The bus arrived with a hiss of hydraulic brakes. I settled into a seat near the back, away from the other passengers. As we pulled away from the station, I didn't look back. There was nothing to see, just the shell of a life I was shedding like an old skin. 3 hours later, I stepped off the bus into an unfamiliar town. The main street was lined with brick buildings that had seen better days, a hardware store with faded signs, a diner advertising best pie in the county, a motel with a flickering neon vacancy sign. It was perfect. Anonymous. Forgettable. I checked into the motel under a false name, James Riley, a small tribute to Jacob. Paid cash for 3 nights, though I doubted I'd need that many. The room was basic but clean, a sagging double bed, a scarred dresser, a TV at least 15 years old. I set my bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted from the journey, from the weight of decisions made and bridges burned. The chest pain came back with a vengeance as I lay down, radiating through my left arm with an intensity that took my breath away. I fumbled in my pocket for the nitroglycerin tablets I'd been prescribed months ago but rarely used. They were expensive, and I'd been rationing them. One dissolved under my tongue, bitter and burning. The pain receded slightly, enough for me to breathe again. I knew I should go to a hospital, but what was the point? To die surrounded by machines and strangers instead of in this quiet room. To rack up bills that would somehow find their way to Darla, undoing the one good thing I'd managed to accomplish. No, this was better, cleaner. As the afternoon light filtered through the thin curtains, I took out the small leather journal and began to write. Not my thoughts or feelings. Those didn't matter anymore. Instead, I wrote down everything I could remember about Sarah. How she hummed when she cooked. The way she always dog-eared the pages of books no matter how many bookmarks I bought her. Her laugh. God, her laugh that started as a giggle and built into something that shook her whole body. Then I wrote about Darla. Her first steps wobbling across our tiny living room. How she insisted on wearing mismatched socks all through second grade. The look of fierce concentration on her face when she learned to ride a bike. Her tongue caught between her teeth. The pride in her eyes when she got her acceptance letter from state. The memories flowed onto the page, my handwriting growing shakier as the hours passed, and the pain ebbed and flowed. I wanted to get it all down. This record of love and ordinary moments. Not for anyone to read. I would tear out these pages before the end, but just to acknowledge that these things had happened, that they had mattered. Night fell. I didn't turn on the lights. Didn't order food, though there was a pizza flyer tucked beside the phone. I just sat in the gathering darkness, watching headlights sweep across the ceiling as cars passed on the highway. In the quiet, I thought about what would happen next. The motel staff would find me eventually. With no ID besides the fake name, they'd call me a John Doe. Maybe there'd be a small obituary in the local paper. Unidentified man, approximately 70, found in motel room. No foul play suspected. Maybe they'd try to find next of kin, but with nothing to go on, they'd eventually give up. And Darla? She'd go on with her life, suddenly wealthy, never knowing the source. The bank would contact her. She might be suspicious at first. Who wouldn't be? But eventually she'd accept it. Use it to pay off her mortgage, her student loans, take a vacation, build the life she deserved. She'd never know I was gone. To her, I'd disappeared years ago, when she blocked my number and removed me from her life. My physical death would be just a formality, a catching up of body to what had already happened in spirit. There was a strange peace in that thought, a completion of the circle. I took out the letter I'd written to her, not to send, just to write, and read it once more in the faint light from the parking lot lamps. Then I tore it into tiny pieces, letting them fall like confetti onto the carpet. Some words didn't need to be read to serve their purpose. Rosa Mendez had been cleaning rooms at the Pinewood Motel for 17 years. In that time, she'd seen it all. Drug deals gone wrong, honeymoon couples who couldn't wait to check out, traveling salesmen who drank themselves to sleep each night. She'd found forgotten wedding rings, abandoned children's toys, and once, a pet snake coiled in a dresser drawer. Nothing surprised her anymore. Until room 14. She'd noticed the "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging on the doorknob for 3 days straight. That wasn't unusual. Some guests valued privacy over fresh towels. But on the 4th day, when checkout time came and went with no sign of the occupant, Rosa mentioned it to the manager. Probably skipped without paying, Frank grumbled, fishing out the master key. Let's see what kind of mess they left us. The smell hit them first. Not the putrid stench of decomposition, but the unmistakable metallic tang of illness. The room was dim, curtains drawn against the late morning sun. And there, on the bed, lay a man, perfectly still, hands folded across his chest like he was posing for his own funeral. "Oh, Jesus," Frank whispered, taking a step back. "Call 911. But Rosa didn't move. Something about the scene struck her as deliberate, almost peaceful. The man hadn't died in panic or pain. He'd prepared for this moment. The bedside table was cleared except for a small wooden box, hand-carved with a simple latch. Next to it sat a wallet, open to reveal a driver's license. Everett Wilson, age 68. While Frank made the call, Rosa found herself drawn to the wooden box. She shouldn't touch anything, she knew that. But something about its placement, so carefully centered on the table, seemed like an invitation. The paramedics confirmed what was already obvious. Everett Wilson had been dead for at least 24 hours. Heart failure, they suspected. No signs of foul play. "Any next of kin?" one of them asked, filling out a form. Frank shrugged. "No idea. He checked in alone, paid cash." As they wheeled the body out on a gurney, Rosa's eyes kept returning to the wooden box. In the commotion, no one noticed when she slipped it into her apron pocket, along with the wallet. Not stealing, she told herself. Safekeeping. That night, after her shift ended and her 3 children were asleep in the small apartment they shared, Rosa finally allowed herself to examine what she'd taken. The wallet contained $47 in cash, a library card from a town 2 states away, and the driver's license. No credit cards, no photos, no personal touches, as if the man had deliberately emptied it of anything meaningful. The wooden box was different. It felt significant in her hands, smooth from years of handling. When she opened it, she found a sealed envelope addressed simply to Darla, a USB drive, and a folded document that looked official, lots of legal language, and a notary stamp at the bottom. Rosa's English wasn't perfect, but she could make out enough to understand. This was a copy of a will. Someone named Jacob Riley had left everything to Everett Wilson, who in turn had arranged for it all to go to someone named Darla Wilson Miller. $7 million. Rosa sat at her kitchen table, stunned. The dead man in room 14, the quiet, unremarkable guest who'd checked in under a false name, had been worth millions, and he'd died alone in a cheap motel room, with nothing but this box to tell his story. She looked at the envelope addressed to Darla. It wasn't sealed, just tucked closed. The temptation to read it was strong, but something stopped her. This wasn't her story to know. These weren't her secrets to keep. The next morning, Rosa did something she'd never done before. She called in sick to work. Instead, she took a bus to the local police station, the wooden box tucked securely in her purse. "I need to report something," she told the officer at the front desk, her accent thickening with nervousness. "About a man who died." Detective Marcus Simmons wasn't having a good day. His coffee was cold, his ex-wife was threatening to take him back to court for more child support, and his caseload was already overflowing. The last thing he needed was a motel housekeeper with an attack of conscience over some personal items she'd pocketed. But as Rosa carefully laid out the contents of the wooden box on his desk, his irritation gave way to curiosity. "Let me get this straight," he said, examining the notarized document. "This guy Wilson inherits a fortune, transfers it all to someone named Darla, then checks into a motel under a fake name and dies?" Rosa nodded. "He left this for her to find." She tapped the envelope and USB drive. But how will she know to look for it? It was a good question. Simmons sighed, already regretting what he was about to do. "Leave it with me. I'll see if I can track her down." It took 3 days of database searches and phone calls. Darla Wilson Miller, 38, veterinary technician in Phoenix, Arizona. No criminal record. Homeowner, married, 2 kids. Nothing remarkable, except for a recent notification from the banking system about a large sum deposited in her name. Simmons called the number on file, not expecting much. These kinds of cases usually ended in voicemail hell. "Hello?" A woman's voice, cautious but clear. "Mrs. Miller? This is Detective Marcus Simmons from the Riverdale Police Department in Missouri. I'm calling about Everett Wilson. I believe he's your father?" A long pause. "Yes," she finally said, her voice tight. "Though we haven't spoken in years. Has something happened?" "I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Your father passed away 4 days ago." The silence that followed was heavy with unasked questions. "I see," she said finally. "How did you find me?" Simmons explained about Rosa, the wooden box, the will. "There are some items he left behind that seem intended for you. A letter, a USB drive, and documentation about a financial transfer." "A financial transfer," she repeated slowly. "Would this have anything to do with the bank that's been calling me? They keep saying there's an account in my name with a substantial amount of money. I thought it was a scam." "It's not a scam, Mrs. Miller. According to the paperwork I'm looking at, your father received an inheritance and transferred all of it to you before he died." Another long pause. "That doesn't make any sense. My father was..." She stopped as if reconsidering her words. "We weren't in contact. He couldn't have known where to find me. Nevertheless, he did. And he left these items for you. Would you like me to send them, or would you prefer to come collect them in person?" The question hung in the air between them, a crossroads. Simmons had seen enough family estrangements to know how this usually played out. Resentments too deep to bridge, even in death. But Darla surprised him. "I'll come," she said softly. "I'll book a flight today." After hanging up, Simmons sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the wooden box. He'd seen thousands of pieces of evidence in his career: murder weapons, stolen goods, contraband of all kinds. But few had felt as weighted with meaning as this simple box and its contents. Whatever story it contained had cost Everett Wilson his life to tell. Now it was up to his daughter to decide whether she wanted to hear it. Darla Miller sat alone in the sterile police station conference room, the wooden box placed carefully in the center of the table, like an artifact from another life, which in many ways it was. Detective Simmons had left her with a sympathetic nod and a cup of terrible coffee, understanding that whatever lay inside that box was for her eyes only. She studied it without touching it at first. The box itself was nothing special, rough-hewn pine with a simple brass latch, the kind you might find at any craft fair or flea market. But there was something about the worn edges, the slight discoloration on one corner, that spoke of time and handling. This hadn't been a last-minute purchase. Her father had carried this box, had opened and closed it many times. With trembling fingers, she finally reached out and lifted the lid. Inside lay 3 items: the notarized will that Detective Simmons had already explained, the sealed envelope with her name, and the USB drive. Small and black, unremarkable except for what it might contain. Darla picked up the envelope first. It felt light, containing perhaps a single sheet of paper. Her name was written in a shaky version of her father's once precise handwriting. She traced the letters with her fingertip, remembering how he used to help her with her homework at the kitchen table. His penmanship so perfect, it looked like it belonged in a textbook. She slid her finger under the flap and opened it carefully, as if it might disintegrate in her hands. A single page, just as she'd guessed. The letter was brief. Darla, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope Detective Simmons found you quickly. There's more I want to tell you, but words on paper aren't enough. Look at the video, it explains everything. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. What happened between us was my fault, not yours. You were right to protect yourself. The money is yours, no strings attached. Do whatever makes you happy. That's all I ever wanted. Dad. Tears blurred her vision, making the last lines swim before her eyes. She blinked them away, determined to see his words clearly. Such a short letter to bridge such a vast distance. 5 years since she'd blocked his number. 5 years of silence that she'd convinced herself was necessary for her own well-being. The memory of their last conversation cut through her like a blade, her voice cold and final as she'd told him to stop calling, stop asking for money, stop being a burden she couldn't carry. That's not love, Dad. It's parasitism. The words had tasted like poison even as she'd said them, but she'd been so tired, so drained by the constant cycle of his needs and failures. And now here she was, $7 million richer because of him, reading his last words while he lay in a morgue drawer 3 floors below. With a deep breath, she reached for the USB drive. Detective Simmons had left a laptop for her use, an older model with scratches on the case, and a department inventory sticker on the lid. She inserted the drive with unsteady hands and waited as the computer recognized the device. A single video file appeared on the screen. The thumbnail showed a man sitting in what looked like a field, trees visible in the background. Her father, but so much thinner than she remembered, his face weathered by sun and hardship. Her cursor hovered over the play button as doubt crashed over her. Did she want to see this? To hear his voice again after all this time? What if it was just another excuse, another plea? But she'd come all this way, booked a last-minute flight that cost more than she would normally spend, left her husband and children with barely an explanation beyond "my father died." She owed it to herself, and maybe to him, to see this through. She clicked play. The video quality was poor, shot on what must have been his old flip phone. The image shook slightly as if the phone had been propped against something unstable. Wind rustled through tall grass around him, the sound tinny through the laptop's speakers. Her father cleared his throat, looked directly at the camera, and began to speak. Darla, I know you blocked my number, and I understand. I failed you in so many ways. But even through all of that, I never stopped loving you. And I just wanted you to be happy, even if it had to be without me. His voice, that familiar deep rumble that had once read her bedtime stories and cheered at her soccer games, washed over her like a forgotten melody. She pressed her fingers to her lips, holding back a sob. I need to tell you about Jacob, he continued. He was a farmer I met at the recovery place. Tough old guy, reminded me of my own dad sometimes. We became friends, I guess you could say. Brothers, almost. He didn't have any family left, and well, I didn't have anyone either. He shifted in his seat, wincing slightly as if in pain, before continuing. When Jacob died, he left everything to me. His farm, his investments, everything. $7 million, Darla. Can you believe that? Me, who couldn't even pay his own electric bill half the time. A bitter laugh escaped him, carried away by the wind. But I knew right away what I was going to do with it. It was never meant for me. I was just the messenger. So I had it all transferred to you. Every penny. By the time you see this, it'll already be in your name. He leaned closer to the camera. His eyes, her eyes, she'd always had his eyes, intense and pleading. I'm not doing this to make you forgive me, or to make up for all the times I asked you for help. I'm doing it because you deserve it, because I want you to have the security I never gave you, because I love you more than my own life. Tears streamed down Darla's face now, unchecked. On the screen, her father wiped his own eyes with a weathered hand. I'm sick, Darla. My heart's giving out, just like my dad's did. The doctors gave me a few months, but I don't think I have that long. And that's okay. I've made my peace with it. He looked away for a moment, gathering himself, then back at the camera with a smile that broke her heart all over again. If you're watching this, it means I'm already gone. But I want you to promise me something. Live with love, not with guilt. You did nothing wrong. This is just a father's last gift to his daughter. The only thing I had left to give. The video continued for another minute. Details about the will. Instructions for contacting Tanner if she had questions. But Darla barely heard it. She was transfixed by her father's face, by the love and resignation written there in equal measure. As the video neared its end, he straightened up, looking directly into the camera one last time. I wish things had been different between us. I wish I'd been stronger, better. But know this, in my last moments I was thinking of you, of your smile, of how proud I am of the woman you've become, despite having me as your father. His voice broke on the last words and the screen went black. The video ended. Darla sat motionless in the hard plastic chair, tears falling onto the table. Outside the window, life in the small Missouri town continued. Cars passing, people walking, clouds drifting across the autumn sky. Inside, her world had shifted on its axis, realigning around a truth she hadn't been ready to face. Her father had loved her, imperfectly but completely, until his very last breath. 18 months after my father's death, Darla stood at the edge of what had once been Jacob Riley's farm. The spring wheat rippled in the breeze like a golden sea, stretching toward the horizon where the cerulean Missouri sky touched the earth. She'd kept 50 acres of the original property, enough to honor the land's history without trying to become a farmer herself. The rest she'd sold to local families who actually knew what to do with good soil. She walked along the perimeter fence, her hand trailing over the weathered wood. Some of these posts had been repaired by her father, she knew. His hands had touched these same rough boards, had hammered these nails, had wiped sweat from his brow in this same sun. The thought no longer brought pain, just a gentle ache, like pressing on a bruise that was finally healing. The small cabin near the property entrance had been Jacob's home, and briefly her father's too. She'd had it renovated but insisted on preserving its character. The wide plank floors, the stone fireplace, the porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It wasn't a home anymore, though. It was something else entirely. The sign above the door read, Riley Wilson Rest Haven. Below, in smaller letters, a sanctuary for those who need a second chance. Inside, 6 elderly men were gathered in the common room. 2 played chess by the window, their gnarled fingers hovering over carved pieces. Another dozed in a recliner, an open book on his lap. 3 more sat at the kitchen table, sorting seeds for the small vegetable garden they'd started behind the cabin. Ms. Miller, called out George, the youngest at 72. Come see what we've got sprouting. Darla smiled and joined them at the table. These men, all former residents of the same recovery farm where her father had spent his final months, had become something like family to her. Each had a story of loss, of failure, of burning bridges they thought could never be rebuilt. But here on this small patch of Missouri farmland, they'd found purpose again. Community. The Haven had been her first major project after accepting her inheritance. When she'd contacted the Rural Recovery Program to inquire about her father's time there, she'd learned how desperately underfunded they were. How many elderly men were turned away for lack of space and resources. How many ended up in homeless shelters or worse. You know what your daddy used to say? Asked Frank, his arthritic hands carefully separating tomato seeds onto a paper towel. He'd say, A man's only as good as the work he leaves behind. Always stuck with me, that did. Darla nodded, her throat tightening. She'd heard so many stories like this. Small moments, casual comments, glimpses of the man her father had become in those final years. A man she'd never known. A man who'd found wisdom and peace despite everything life had thrown at him. He was right, she said softly. The work matters. And she'd tried to make her own work matter. The Haven was just the beginning. There was the scholarship fund for veterinary students who wanted to work in underserved rural communities. The anonymous payments of medical bills for seniors in the county hospital. The trust she'd established for her own children. Not to make them rich, but to ensure they'd never know the kind of desperation that had driven a wedge between her and her father. After checking in with the residents and reviewing supply orders with the part-time caretaker, Darla made her way to the small hill at the far edge of the property. There, beneath an ancient oak tree, stood two simple markers. One for Jacob Riley, whose body had been moved from the town cemetery at her request, and one for Everett Wilson. She knelt between the graves, brushing leaves from the stone bases. This had become her ritual during her bi-monthly visits, this quiet communion with two men who'd never met her children, who'd never seen what their legacy had built, who'd never know how their final act of generosity had transformed not just her life, but dozens of others. "Hey, Dad," she said softly, the way she always began. "The Haven's full again. We're thinking of expanding, adding a few more rooms to the east wing." The wind rustled through the oak leaves above, a whispering response. "The kids are good. Michael got selected for the science fair finals. Reminds me of when you helped me build that volcano in 4th grade. Remember how it erupted all over the kitchen?" She smiled at the memory, one of the good ones that had been buried beneath years of hurt and disappointment, but had resurfaced in the months following his death. Like treasures washing up on a shore, these moments kept returning to her, reminding her that their story hadn't been all struggle and pain. "I found your old chess set in Mom's things," she continued. "Been teaching Michael how to play. He's got your patience, Dad, your focus. Sees 10 moves ahead already." From her bag, she withdrew a small envelope and placed it on the grave. Inside was the latest letter from a woman in Kansas whose mother's medical bills had been paid by the Wilson Memorial Fund. Letters like these arrived regularly now. Thank yous from strangers whose lives had been touched by money that had passed from Jacob to her father to her, and finally to them. Sometimes she read these letters aloud during her visits. Today, she simply left it there, a testament to the ripples spreading outward from her father's final act of love. "I saw him yesterday," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "That bank manager you worked with, Mr. Tanner. He told me something I didn't know." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "He said you knew how sick you were, that the doctors had given you 6 months, but you told him you didn't have that long, that you were racing against time to get everything in order." Tears pricked at her eyes, but they weren't the devastating sobs that had consumed her in that police station conference room 18 months ago. These were gentler, tinged with understanding rather than regret. "You never said that in your video. Never mentioned how much pain you must have been in. Never used it to make me feel guilty." A cardinal landed on a branch overhead, its bright red plumage stark against the blue sky. Darla watched it for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I think I understand now," she finally said. "Why you disappeared the way you did. Why you didn't try harder to reach me. You wanted me to have the money without the burden of watching you die, without feeling obligated to forgive you just because you were leaving." She placed her palm flat against the cool stone of his marker. "That was your final gift to me, wasn't it? The chance to come to terms with everything in my own time, on my own terms." She stood up slowly, brushing grass from her jeans. In the distance, she could see the Haven, smoke curling from its chimney despite the mild day. Old men felt the cold differently, her father had explained in his video. The chill settled in their bones and never quite left. "I have to go," she said, "but I'll be back next month. I'm bringing the kids this time. I want them to see this place, to understand where their future came from." As she walked back toward her car, Darla felt the familiar sense of peace that always followed these one-sided conversations. She'd never hear her father's voice again, never feel his arms around her, never have the chance to say all the things she wished she'd said while he was alive. But somehow, paradoxically, she'd found him after he was gone, in the stories from the recovery farm residents, in the gratitude of those helped by his legacy. in her own children's faces when they mastered something difficult or showed unexpected kindness. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the Arizona sunset painted her kitchen in shades of amber and gold, she'd find herself reaching for her phone, instinctively wanting to share some small triumph or challenge with him. The impulse would fade as quickly as it came, replaced by a gentle acceptance. He was gone, but not lost. Not anymore. And that, perhaps, was the greatest inheritance of all. Some relationships break in ways we think can never be repaired. Like Everett and Darla, we build walls of silence thinking they protect us, never realizing that beyond those walls, miracles might be waiting. What would you have done in Everett's place? Would you have told your daughter about the money before it was too late? Or like him, would you have chosen to give without conditions, without expectations, even knowing you'd never see the gratitude in her eyes? The most profound gifts often come from unexpected sources, sometimes from the very people we've pushed away. Everett never got to see the haven his sacrifice created, never witnessed how his final act transformed not just Darla's life, but dozens of others. Yet in his disappearance, he was finally found. In his death, his love was reborn. Perhaps the truest measure of love isn't what we say when everyone's listening, but what we do when no one's watching. If this story touched your heart, remember that second chances don't always announce themselves. They often arrive silently, disguised as ordinary moments or blocked phone calls. Don't wait until it's too late to answer. Follow this channel for more stories that will make you think twice about the calls you ignore and the people you've left behind. Like, share, and tell me in the comments. What call do you need to return today? What relationship deserves one more chance?